Hey, fellas, do you remember a time when social circles meant that you physically got to hang out with somebody on a routine basis? And I mean like besties. My social circle actually fit in my car. Do you remember that? Do you remember that?
Yeah, that seems like it was a lot longer ago than it was.
That was Y2. That was around the time of Y2K, right?
Was it
Yeah.
like? I mean, I'm thinking like high school. Like we used to climb into my Plymouth Horizon, which had really terrible shocks, and we would bounce our way down the cruising strip, which was from the Dairy Queen to the Hotspot gas station and back. I think it was probably maybe a half mile at most.
Dairy Queen. I was a Wendy's guy because you could get a junior bacon cheese for a
Hmm.
dollar. And I
We
usually
didn't
had
ha-
about $3 on me.
we had a small town. We didn't even have a stoplight in our town. We did not have a Wendy's. We had a Dairy Queen and that was it.
Oh,
I had three brothers, and we would go and buy like 20 burgers from Wendy's to feed us in
yeah.
our
Oh my
teenage years.
gosh. Oh, now is that with a Frosty or without?
Sometimes.
No, no, because that wasn't part of the special.
Yeah.
Oh.
Today's episode is brought to you by Wendy's. So
When you're
anyway,
supposed to be a kid.
nowadays social circles are like they're virtual, right? And for me, in my opinion, social media is sort of the anti-social media because it gives you this excuse like, "Oh, I see everything Joe and Adam are doing online already. I do not need to get physical FaceTime with them." But I feel like
Mhm.
it's led to this incredible disconnect. I think particularly our children who've grown, literally grown up in that social media era, um, mine included, by the way, would rather like text each other than talk to each other face to face. Have you guys seen this where your kids are in the car together and with their friends and they're texting each other instead of talking to each other?
Yeah. I mean, I've got teenage girls though, so I think it kind of comes with the territory, but you're absolutely right. I mean, even people in the same house, there's texting back and forth instead of, "Hey honey, do you want to run to the store with me?" It's, you know,
Yeah. I
Well, it's
am
just we're
guilty.
people of convenience.
Eh,
So,
I
you
mean,
know,
I'm guilty. I'm upstairs in my office right now. So there's a flight of stairs between myself and my husband. And if I need something from my husband, and this is because of arthritis and age, not because I'm antisocial, but I will text him that I need something.
yeah.
But anyway, so according to studies, human beings, they need social connection. Like we are a social being. Um, do you two encourage in-person interactions at home? What does that look like?
100%. I mean, it's not really an option. It's more like you occasionally may get some screen time. I saw like a meme or something said once, like when you want your kid to stop being a kid, give them social media. So we gave our 13-year-old a phone because we're like, oh great, well we want her to still be a kid. But then I saw another meme that's like, when you want your kids to stop being a kid, give them a phone. And I was like, dang it, should have seen that one. Should have seen that one first.
Give them bills
Uh,
and rent.
this feels like a who's on first kind of thing. Yeah.
It's hard though because we've seen everything. We've seen the benefits before and after. We're at that perfect age where we've seen what it's like before all this stuff, and we've seen
Hmm.
what it's done, and they've only seen that's all they've ever known. And so we seem like fuddy-duddies, like our grandparents, but realistically, think about as much fun as we've had on this podcast and talking to each other. Like, could you imagine us sitting down and having dinner together? We would laugh nonstop. Like, and you and I, Stacy, we've had a couple of great dinners, with After Action and stuff like that, and it's always been an absolute blast. I think a lot of times you think that it's good enough until you get the real thing and you go, "Wow, I needed that. I really miss that."
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. I'm the director of operations for a coalition with 50 organizations, and so we manage a digital community. We have monthly meetings, and
Mhm.
most of us never meet in person. And then when we have an engagement or a function, it like creates those bonds, like you're talking about, for life. It strengthens them, strengthens our relationship. It makes you feel so comfortable and so inspired because you're working with these people, across these digital boundaries. But then when you're in that physical proximity, there's nothing really like it. And
Yeah.
so I think like that's the conversation here, going back to the circles that we ran with in high school. It was a time where those were your lifelong friends because you felt you could be yourself, as you took on the world. And I think we need more of that.
Yeah. Well, alphas, get on in your cars, get down to your legions. In the meantime, we're going to get this podcast started.
This is the Tango Alpha Lima podcast.
They call me crazy cause I'm facing all my giants. They try to scare me into thinking I can fight it. They tell me I should never even think of trying. But that's just me, I'm gonna live out in defiance.
Welcome, Alphas. Thanks for joining us today. Our guest is Dr. Jay Gorman, Education Director of the Mental Illness Research, Education, and Clinical Center at the VA Bedford Healthcare System. We're going to talk with him about veteran socials and how they're helping to decrease social isolation and loneliness among veterans. But before we get to that, we have a Bravo Zulu for a post that is also working to take care of veterans in their community.
Speaking of community, so we're handing out a Bravo Zulu today to Georgia American Legion Post 127 in Sugar Hill, Georgia. Apparently, it's a hill made of sugar, and if it ever rains, the entire town is gone. It's going to be washed away.
Do you
But
think
we're not
they have
talking about
cavities?
that.
A lot of dentists.
How are your cavities in Sugar Hill, Georgia, guys?
It's bad. It's an epidemic. But fortunately, we've got American Legion Post 127 there. So Emil Valles posted on Legiontown last month. During this past winter, a veteran who had been living in their car for years contacted a Legion post for help when they became stranded in another state. So first of all, I just want to touch upon that and say there's a great deal. Somebody dropped the ball somewhere. When a veteran is that isolated and living in their car for that long, not to say that they weren't dealing with their own issues. I don't know this person's story, but somebody dropped the ball somewhere. These, we got to do these buddy checks and check on our guys and make sure that they've got food and they've got a place to sleep. And but luckily, Georgia American Legion 127 commander and their team took charge of this situation. So they got the car back to the area after partnering with another great veteran organization named GI Garage, which I've never heard of up until this point, and absolutely going to be looking into because I love the concept. I mean, when you're somebody that's living paycheck to paycheck, a $400 tire could be enough to really derail your entire month. So, I imagine this poor guy, this is his home and it's broken. So GI Garage, which trains and helps veterans, they house the veteran in a hotel while they got a new transmission for the car, which transmissions are insane. I don't know when the last time you had one of those changed out, but it's like $3 or $4 grand if you can find someone to do it. So these people are spending real money taking care of this guy. So got a new transmission for his car and other repairs done with the assistance from Post 127. He also received fundraising and assistance from another veteran organization named NAM Knights. Finally, with assistance from Operation Rally Point, another great VSO, this veteran now has permanent housing. So all these people jumped together and all these organizations came together to help this veteran, and these organizations continue. And this is all in the Atlanta metro area, which is a pretty big area, and this is my home area. So, I'm kind of proud of Georgia Post 127. You guys kind of rock. So what do you guys think about this?
Well, I think there's a lot of value when a Legion post steps up when a fellow veteran is in need. And, that's really a perfect example in this case here at my own post as well. We had, a single mom, come in around the holidays last year that was looking for help. And I was just overwhelmed at the willingness, of the post that wanted to contribute and help her. And, she had even brought her young children, to the meeting. I think it was a cautionary tale for us because as much as you want to offer that help and support, and in this case, it was very clear that this person was in distress. Yeah. And in our case, when we tried to get like proof that this individual was a veteran, she couldn't produce it and ultimately, kind of vanished. So I think like our good nature and service oriented, like wants to help and is looking for ways, and so commendable when we do it. But we also have to make sure that we have those guardrails in place to protect ourselves so we're not being taken advantage of, as well.
People coming in honestly, though, had she shown up and told her story honestly, I'm sure there would have been help there.
Oh, no doubt. No doubt.
But it's sad. It's sad when people feel like they have to resort to identifying as a veteran to get help, because that just speaks how hard it is to be out on your own like that, to be stuck and to be in a bad situation. I mean, I think everybody, whether you've got kids or not, but especially if you've got kids, has noticed how crazy expensive just living is now. And so, unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of people that are really struggling.
Yeah. Well, I think this is also an opportunity to kind of circle back on the American Legion's campaign of Be the One, and to lift other people up and when they need it. And even if it's just one veteran at a time, if it's one transmission at a time, and getting secure housing, because we're talking about the fundamentals of human beings' needs, food, water, shelter.
Yeah.
And that's the least we can do for our community. And so well done to you folks who all came together in Atlanta.
Yeah. Way to go,
Bravo
Post
Zulu,
127.
Post 127.
That was very sweet of you in Sugar Hill.
Oh my gosh. That was a saccharine compliment.
I love it. Okay, Alpha, stick around. We'll be right back with Dr. Gorman right after the break.
Did you know that over 36% of veterans experience migraines? If you're among them, you're not alone, and there is a drug-free solution that can help. Meet GammaCore, a non-invasive vagus nerve stimulator designed to prevent and treat your headache pain. It's small, portable, and easy to use. It works by gently stimulating the vagus nerve to reduce pain and can be seamlessly integrated with other medications or treatments you may already be using. You deserve relief and control over your migraines. To get started with GammaCore, call your VA provider or use the MyHealthVet portal to schedule an appointment today.
Okay, today we're joined by Dr. Jay Gorman. Dr. Gorman, welcome to the Tango Alpha Lima podcast. So great to have you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. What a wonderful place to be invited, and I look forward to chatting.
Yeah. Can I call you Doc or Jay? Something a little less formal?
Jay is great.
Perfect. Jay, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to meet you. I also wanted to thank you for what you're doing to help veterans. Personally, I struggled after I medically retired, and I had an identity crisis big time. I isolated myself. I kind of stopped going out socially. I went on a downward spiral from there, but eventually I did claw my way back. And it was because of the help I got from other veterans, including my husband, who's also a vet. In a way, we kind of helped each other. But I guess what I'm driving at is, in my research for this podcast, I did a deep dive on veteran socials, which was developed by VA and your team at Voices. You guys talk about the importance of community and social interaction and encourage veterans to establish what coffee socials. What is that? Why is that? And why should we be stepping up and doing this?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I appreciate you sharing your challenge, and I think that's a big part of the power of like veteran to veteran connection. And with veteran socials, what we have is veteran-led, community-based social events, and these typically occur weekly, and they really occur with the purpose of enabling veterans to enjoy, support, and connect with one another. So, it's really a hyper-localized effort, which means veteran hosts customize these based on their community's needs and preferences. And they can look like, as you pointed out, they can look like having coffee for 90 minutes every week in a coffee shop. They can look like board games in the evening. They can look like coordinating around volunteering activities. But the goal is to increase social connection, right, across the nation, and doing it one community at a time. That's part of what these veteran socials were, why they were established.
It's interesting you say that, because I feel like the easier it is to be social, whether it's in person or whether it's not, the less we do it, because it's like there's always the option to do it, so we don't push ourselves into that space anymore. Just like if you've ever worked 3 or 4 minutes from your house, you're more likely to be late from that than you are if you are half an hour away. I think it's because we have this idea, we tell ourselves in some ways that we are socializing because we're we have social media and things like that, which don't really cut it, because there's nothing quite like sitting down and hanging out with each other. But sorry, I jumped in there. First of all, I want to say thank you so much for spending time hanging out with us here. Just to introduce myself a little bit, I was born in a quaint little town. Okay, not really. I was a corpsman with 2-1 Marines. Got injured in 2004, and just like Stacy, I had to figure out a lot of how to take Fallujah and a 3-month-old daughter I'd never met and turn all that into one person, a dad, and going from being the guy that everybody comes to for help to all of a sudden I need help with everything, in the most humbling of ways. And because of my support system and things like that, I've mentioned this in multiple interviews before, I don't know how people do it without a support system. I don't know how people do that. And so I love what you're doing. Your work at the VA Bedford Healthcare System focuses heavily on these veterans, and a lot of these guys and gals are dealing with mental health and substance use issues, which is unfortunately a big problem among veterans. So what are some of the most significant challenges that you've observed in addressing these issues?
Yeah. I mean, I think some, so as you pointed out, like, the idea of what social connection is, right? It can be as simple as reaching out, right? As you're similar to, you have the Be the One campaign, right? Which is really about peer-to-peer connection and is about decreasing mental health stigma. And there's a really shared mission at that. And some of the, the challenges that we see really are across across the spectrum, but really leveraging the power of this veteran to veteran connection, I think it is part of it, is really part of the solution, right? And it's complex, so for example, I have permission to to talk about Jess, but when I think of Jess's story, she left the military after 6 years, and she had profound disconnection, right? Leaving her whole military community, essentially like becoming an adult, right, in the military, as many of you know, and this also kind of was compounded with undiagnosed post-traumatic stress and substance use issues, and she really sought social support in mutual self-help groups or religion, but she felt like they didn't quite understand her experience, and at times she felt belittled for her experience, and it really sometimes left her feeling more alone. And eventually she ran into a VA peer specialist. So that is a veteran with a lived mental health and substance use experience, who's really like a model of like growth and resilience that works in VA. And they said, she come to the social and hang out. We've got a bunch of veterans, and she immediately said no. And then he asked again, and he said, "Look, I'll meet you there. Here's my number. I'll meet you there. Come on and hang out." And she did. And they gave her a space, and it wasn't what she feared. She thought it was going to be war stories and be worried, but it wasn't that. And people gave her time, and she kept coming back. And eventually, she talked more, and they invited her out, and she said no, but eventually she said yes. And she found friends. She found connection. And you know over time, the peer specialists there encouraged her to get mental health care and encouraged her to stick with it when it was really hard. And she started a social on her own. And eventually, she wanted to become a peer specialist. And I got to meet Jess, and she helped me write the guidebook that help with the Voices team that help us spread this now across 20 states. And I just feel like you know, this national infrastructure that VA has built, this infrastructure that all these veteran service organizations have, right? They create the potential for these local community connections to happen. And it really becomes this like one person at a time. Right. But the national infrastructure creates this possibility. So these moments of connection happen locally.
And you got to hold on to them when they happen. I mean, that's the big thing, is that we tend to one off on these interactions that we have with each other and don't follow up. So, I appreciate you making it easier for people to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dr. Gorman, great to have you here today. So, I can really see the value of social connection in my own personal experiences, but also, when I got out, I started a nonprofit called Warrior Angels Foundation. And it was interesting because at that time, we were just kind of focused specifically on treating the physical injury to TBI. And then as the years have gone by, what we found in this veteran mental health community and all these VSOs, to include American Legion now and Be the One, is it's not just about the point of care, but also the community-based integration and the social interactions. So I'd like to hear a little bit about your personal journey, as much as you'd like to share, that kind of led you to this expertise and work, and why increasing social connection is so important to you. And I know you've also had the opportunity to lead some research, as well. So any key insights or
Sure.
benefits that might be valuable to our listeners as well on the benefits of social connection.
Absolutely. So, for me, I actually grew up really not knowing a lot about the military. So I think like a lot of people, and, really not getting sort of engaged in what is happening in the veteran and military community until in grad school, right? When I was lucky, I got to do training in a VA, and you sort of experience very early on the sacrifice that people make at such an early age in their life, and really like the inordinate amount of responsibility that gets put on so few people for the sake of the country. And sort of from then on, I trained every year to VA and worked with veterans ever since. And I I went to VA Bedford Healthcare System, and then the VISN one within Bedford Healthcare System, the VISN one Mental Illness Research and Education and Clinical Center, and I provide clinical services and research there. And how this really started, when we kind of think about it, and sort of part of a journey of really discovering the power of the veteran veteran connection and social connection in general, is a peer specialist, a veteran, and staff came together and they said, man, we have people coming into these services, uh, and these residential treatment services, and then they leave, but they go to communities that they're alone, and they come back in for treatment
Mm,
again, and they don't seem to have a support system. We should really start extending support outside the VA. And they said, well, what if we start with these social events, and we just go to these places where we know veterans leave from residential treatment. And so they started doing that, and they said, hey, people are having positive support systems. And all of a sudden they said, actually, veterans from the community are coming to hang out with us too, and they're talking, and they're going out for barbecues, and they're making friends. And then what they're also saying is, the veterans that have care are, and often are saying, hey, I saved a lot of money switching to VA for my prescriptions, or I really like this one doctor. And so then we're starting to enroll veterans in VA care, right? And so we're realizing like this isn't just a way to extend support, like this is a community building strategy. And really from then on, we got support from the Office of Mental Health and Suicide Prevention and the VHA
mhm.
Office of Rural Health. And now, with VHA Innovation Ecosystem, they've helped us to like spread, and now we're in, sort of 20 states, 98 locations. And so, a big part of that was like witnessing it clinically. And I think the other thing in sort of my journey is, I'm a psychologist. I do therapy, and as a therapist, we can provide a lot of mental health services, but what we really can't do is provide social connection and friendship.
Mhm.
I mean, it's just out of our power. And what we know is that individuals who have social support systems, who have social connection in their lives, are healthier in all sorts of ways: better heart health, less
Mm.
cognitive decline. It buffers symptoms of post-traumatic stress. I mean, your risk of you if you're lonely and isolated, your risk of death increases by 32%, right? Like obesity, in many ways. And so we know there's all these really health enhancements that happen.
Mhm.
And so it's sort of almost like that frustration, within, like, oh, this is what I can't help with. And so from then on, it really sort of took off of like, how can we create this and how can we spread this?
Well, thank you for that, Dr. Gorman. It's quite a journey you've kind of been on, and it seems like just coming very authentically and organically, out of necessity and what was working. And I think, from my personal experience, the veteran goes into service, at 17, 18, officers at 20, and then you're put into this organizational system that in a lot of ways is your social system and your community and your brother and sisterhood. And then whether you leave the service of your own accord, or, you separate, depending if you've been 5 years, 10 years, 15, 35 years, now you're like, I never really had to learn how to make friends and show up in social settings before, because it was just a way of like my job. And, I got out at the 10-year mark, and I went back home, and, it was hard for me. It was hard for me as a 31-year-old, former captain, to be able to find ways to integrate back into my community. So it's also really inspiring to hear how much benefits health-wise you get from just being in communion with other humans. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate your journey as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
I was reading on the resources that, I mean, because you said you had this great, like, I think it's 8 pages, an 8-page PDF talking about how one of these social meetups, these social connection activities happen, ideal settings, who should be leading them. And of course, you talk about, it would be great and ideal for veterans to lead them because we're much more able to connect with each other, given our language barriers between us and civilians. Not that civilians can't do it, but I think if for the alphas listening who may be thinking about hosting a veteran social, if you're open to it, Jay, maybe we could have a little fun by doing an impromptu veteran social here on the podcast, where it's between the 4 of us. Let's say we meet up at that one of those locations, and maybe, if you don't mind, Jay, could you be the facilitator and kind of provide us with what it would be like just to get the ball rolling?
Sure, sure. So, okay, yeah. So, first, hey, we say, well, welcome. Yeah, thanks for coming here. What brought you here?
I am here because I absolutely love veterans and the American Legion. So
I was
I'm here
told
because I heard Dr. Gorman does some pretty awesome work in social connection. I'm excited to learn more about that.
Yeah, excited to learn about social connection.
I was told there was going to be donuts.
that's
You were
fair.
told there could be donuts. Well, welcome to all of you. You've all came to the right place. We have donuts, and we can talk about social connection. And welcome to being here. So, tell me about. So I'm hearing that you're here. I'm hearing what. So tell me about. Are you military affiliated?
I was in the Air Force and I
Okay.
was a combat photographer, and I did 10 years in the military. I lived in
Yeah.
Charleston, South Carolina. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, for
Well,
me, I commissioned from TCU as a second lieutenant. I went to flight school for a couple of years, learned to fly helicopters, and did that for about 10 years, deployed to Iraq, and then decided to get out because I was ready for what's next.
you ready for what's next? Fair enough.
I was a Navy corpsman with 2-1 Marines. Got a little banged up. Got a good parking spot in 2004, and ended up coming home to sort of grow my family and kind of like Adam there, figure out what's next.
Hmm. Well, that is great. So you'll see. So we can roll it,
Yeah.
but you see,
And
like,
scene.
and scene. Great work.
Nailed it.
You all are definitely going to be in the next role play we put out for the training. But we start with like a welcome, right? We engage, and then we find ways to connect. And you'll see with this, and then some of the major elements in here, right? Is we're held weekly. We're not taking notes in any type of like VA medical record, right? So this isn't some kind of medical record. We're also having key information. So the veteran host has a big role as a veteran host, right? They have like key contacts information for veteran resources, whether it's VA or community resources. They also have key information around the events that people would go towards in the community. So the idea is that this is a regular occurring event, and that's how you build social support systems, is regular occurring contact. And then you want to offer different opportunities for increased contact over time. And that's essentially how we form friendships, right? We have regular occurring positive contact. We have other events that we go to. We share interests. We share commonalities. And then that veteran host also follows up with individuals. So, I mean, it kind of reminds me of, in a lot of ways, what we've taken on, sort of some of the mantle, I think, of the American Legion is it's also the spirit of like the buddy check, right? Which I think the American
Mhm.
Legion is really responsible for in a lot of ways. And I know VA took this into a buddy check campaign. right? Is to check on one another. And so the idea is to create a culture where individuals feel comfortable seeking and providing help, and a culture where individuals look out for each other. And so, I know for the October 21st to 25th, we're going to be buddy check sites. So veteran socials around the country are going to help with that campaign. But I think what you'll see is like for instance, like I wouldn't host a veteran social, right? I'm actually kind of the worst, right? I'm a psychologist and I'm not a veteran, right? I wouldn't necessarily be the most, but boy, have I gone to a lot of them, right? I attend and I go, and so it really speaks to the power of that veteran to connection and to get that culture of everyone having your six.
You
Well,
know,
I appreciate you humoring me on that day.
Oh yeah, of course.
It's gonna inspire some others, hopefully.
well, yeah, that's what I was going to say. I know we kind of threw a little goof off and a little fun, but I think that what happens when you get veterans together. I think by the time we had done one episode together, we were ribbing each other and joking around. Veterans from all branches tend to gravitate to one another very quickly. Sometimes like weirdly quickly, like you're literally sitting there and you've spent 10 minutes in the airport with somebody and you're already like making observational humor about the people around you or whatever. And it's fun when you can do that, because I call it like dogs, or sneaky therapy. You're connecting with a human being, and though even though you're not talking about your traumas or whatever, that connection is so important. As a veteran myself with some pretty isolating experiences, it can be hard to connect with people that don't have that military experience. And I think that one good thing that has really helped me is both Stacy and I are graduates of America's Vet Dogs, and dogs are a bridge or ambassadors between me and people that don't have the same experiences as me. And then once I have that connection, once I've had that conversation, I feel connected to these people again, even if it's just we both like dogs. But when you're kids, it's like, I like your shoes. I have the same color shoes. We're buddies. We're going to play together on the playground for 4 hours because
Isn't that
of
magical?
shoes.
Oh my gosh.
Like, how beautiful is that? And we lose
Yeah.
that as we get older. And I think veterans still have a little bit of that, because you get thrown into all these high stress situations and you've got to trust the people quickly. So you go invulnerable and ready to open up. So now, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, you got
No,
something.
no, no. I'm just sort of thinking. The way you explain that is so true in so many ways. And I have to say, like, the first time we started doing this as a civilian, like, it's sort of jarring to hear that ribbing back and forth so quickly. I mean, now I'm used to it, because
Yeah.
I go to these things. But at first, you're like, oh my gosh. Are they in an argument? You know what I mean? Are they fighting already? Is this
No.
is this oh, this is not going well already. How did this happen? And you're like, oh no, like this is communication, you
Oh
know?
yeah.
Right? And I think that is like such a wonderful thing. But it does, it takes it's I would say, like, it's not traditional, right? It's not the
Yeah.
way a psychologist would communicate with somebody, right? And I think that's the beauty, is like it's a message is as only as good as not only the message being sent, but the messenger. And
Yes.
it's so powerful when your messenger can understand your experience and you can communicate at the same level. And that really goes far with establishing trust, right?
Mhm.
Establishing connection, right? And so, when a veteran at a social gives a resource, right,
Yeah.
or gives advice, it is taken very seriously, right? It's like, this person knows my experience. I've trusted this person. I've been here, right? It's when it's like, this is Mike, or this is Jess, or this is something like, this is a person that I know and that I trust. And in a lot of ways, like, there's like a consciousness raising aspect, right? An idea of like, I didn't even know I had these needs, but now I'm looking around me and all these people are talking about that it's okay to get different care, or that I may have this concern, or maybe I should get this infection looked at, or that's on my arm, or maybe. And so I think there's a lot of powerful messages that happen, right, in the course of socially connecting with others.
I think it comes from that the like you said, the messenger. When there's love behind it, you can say a lot to each other, even if it sounds to the outside like somebody's arguing or fussing at somebody. There's a lot of love, behind that. So having said that, we have these, these veteran socials. We're working together. So what future developments do you foresee? Like, where do we go from here? Um,
Yeah.
that was
Yeah.
it. That's sort of like what I was getting at, but I could tell you had
No, no
something when I
problem.
started running my mouth.
No problem. So I see it in a couple ways. No, I see it a couple ways. So one is what I'm seeing now and growing. So like when for instance, like I went to Post 113. They're in Manchester by the Sea, and I was talking to Peter Gajitsky there, and I walk in and I look around and they have, local donated donuts and local coffee. And I look and there's kids coloring in coloring books because they provide coloring books for families, for kids. And then there's people of all generations talking. And most of these socials are around 7 to 10 people, but this is a 25, 30 person social, right? And it's like really pretty, it's like overlooking the water. And I'm talking to him. I'm like, and he's talking about how he grows and strengthens his community. And he's like, yeah, we do this as part of like regular connecting. We have these speakers come in every quarter. We, and when we have these speakers, we say also, hey, you should really come. We hang out every week here, and we're just trying to strengthen our community. And then, as a VA provider, we know that we need people to have social connection to be healthy. So we are referring people to veteran socials like all over our state, right? We're advertising, we have newsletters, we have social media posts to go to these places. And so I think this is, one way communities can like grow and strengthen themselves is with this collaboration, right? Because obviously there are gaps in support and gaps in care, and I think together veterans service organizations, VA, can really make a difference. And there's sort of these different models. I know we have town and state, like we have veteran service officers like V Chipperini in Gloucester and Cape Ann, who has really figured out how to. She holds one every day, and there seems to be different generations at each one, and there are different ways, and there different ways she's running them, and she's provided a lot of technical advice. So I see, there are other regions like Post 98 in Rockland. They do a lot of fishing trips, and they say you should come by. Like you should meet with us every week. And sometimes, these are individuals. The only social contact they have every week is through these, and they also have a volunteer mission where they sort of give out medical equipment, so they're planning around there to help their community. So I think the customization and the localization of it allows them to shift. So I think there's a future in that way, where socials can sort of move and customize to strengthen their community. And yeah, that's where sort of I kind of see us moving there. And I see us moving and connecting in other ways, like maybe, different ways online as we move toward different ways through,
Mm.
gaming and all of that, and, all of that thing. So we're sort of looking at all
Gaming's
these different
huge.
avenues.
Well, I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
that's
yeah.
Like with veterans, gaming is huge. I see,
Hmm.
I'm a part of the regiment group, which is a huge
Oh, yeah,
military Discord, and I mean, there's 65-year-olds and 18-year-olds, and
yeah.
it's all over the place, and I love it. So veterans like taking care of each other, and when you give them an opportunity to do that, when you're giving them a baseline to do that, it's going to grow from there. And I agree with you. I think, like you said, it's going to be localization and customization based off the veterans and the needs of the area. So, hey, appreciate it, man. Killer answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like the localization and socialization and some of these communities in gaming and online, and that's kind of where I wanted to go next because I'd be interested to kind of hear your thoughts on digital consumption in connection and maybe how that's hindering us in some regards for our IRL connections. That's in real
Sure.
life, Joe. So
Yeah.
I think like in the last 25 years, our technology has advanced so much in a lot of regards. We have this supercomputer smartphone that we take everywhere. So as that's happened, it's like we've exponentially consumed and connected more digitally. And then it seems like with COVID, maybe even, inversely, we've stepped away from coming in connection with one another. So I'd just be interested on maybe your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I know you've had actually Dr. Murthy on this, the U.S. Surgeon General, who talked a little about like, the challenge of like, oh my gosh, like if 3 hours a day for people under 18 on social media is like really negative to their health, and the average is 3.5 hours. Oh my gosh, So I mean, we know that there is some challenges in their way in that, in the way that we consume
Hmm.
news, the way that we consume social media. We know that there's gonna have to be some sort of writing and somehow writing that. I will say, there's also an avenue where where the way that we connect and how we connect online can be positive, right? I mean, I think,
Mm-hmm.
I think people are, people are sort of, sort of realizing that, like, well, look, actually, I'm sending texts and I'm sending, my friends memes on on these different social media, and we feel some connection there, and the research hasn't quite caught up, right? With like, what are the positives, right? There are a lot of research is talking about some negatives, right? Some negatives of things. So I think it's generally going to be the way that we communicate, right, and how
Mm-hmm.
we communicate. And I think we're searching for all different avenues to connect with one another in a challenging world.
Yeah, and it's probably a little bit different for different generations too, right? Like baby boomers to Gen X to millennials to Gen Z, they're all comfortable like showing up and engaging in different ways, and
Yeah.
also how they engage digitally.
I mean, as long as
Yeah.
that digital version of yourself is can be authentic,
Yeah.
you know, yeah, I get, because if otherwise, because for instance, you mentioned like I send these stupid memes and stuff to a buddy I met at Dragon Con, Air Force veteran, just ran into the guy. We're like best buddies, just because like we talked about earlier, veterans running into veterans,
Mhm.
and all of a sudden we're just friends, and I get real peace and feel companionship and love out of that. But that's because we're very honest with each other. And for instance, if I post something that he doesn't agree with, he'll explain his point and we'll have a discussion about it. So we're always going into that digital version of ourselves is always open and vulnerable enough to have a conversation. And
Yeah.
I think the trap is that Instagram, like this perfect
Curated.
version of yourself. Yeah,
Yeah.
go ahead,
Curated
Stacey.
version.
I'm rambling at this point,
No,
but you
that's okay.
point.
No, but I think that kind of is an interesting segue into one thing that I want to address head on, because this is a landmine we all have to navigate.
Mhm.
How do we as veterans, when we're in social settings like this, because we are all have the baggage we're bringing to this party, if you will,
Yeah.
and they could all be, like I said, landmines. So how do we as veterans cope with, say, veterans who are in a darker space, who may be experiencing suicidal ideation, who may be grappling with substance use disorder? How do we not get pulled down while trying to lift them up? How do we stay strong? How do we navigate those landmines? What tips can we bring?
Yeah, and I think, just stating the efforts that are already being made, when we talk about Be the One campaign, and we talk about, all these efforts with peer-to-peer connection. We know that there is point of crisis care, right? The point of time when having crisis, right? We're saying, okay, this is the time we call 988 and we press one, right? As a veteran, that suicide prevention crisis, right? But there's also a lot of like upstream, right, ways to decrease the risk for suicide. And when I say upstream, it's before the point of crisis. It's usually around increasing protective factors and decreasing risk factors. And one of those ways that we can do that is increase social connection and social support systems, right? People with healthier support systems can manage the bumps and challenges of life a little easier. So I think a lot of the things that we're trying to doing in veteran socials, and I think the ways that you're working with Be the One campaign goes a long way in sort of making those efforts, right? And then what you also talk about is like, how do we keep ourselves, right? How do we keep ourselves in the right place so that we can move forward and provide that? And the idea is that, the bigger the more sort of social systems we have, the way that we can also interact with, whether we talk about VA care or or the way that we talked about, others that are able to get, others that are able to sort of manage challenges and crises, right? I think a lot of it goes with how can we collaborate and how can we get people to sort of the best care in the soonest way, and that's going to take working together, right? That's going to take collaboration, right? No one entity can do that all by themselves.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Let's see. So, you mentioned, that, you're talking about the localization, and you're talking about these things that sort of, naturally happen with veterans. And I think that we've underestimated a lot of times that spot, that sweet spot of being able to get help, that sweet spot. There's a place, I talk about this when we have people coming through America's Vet Dogs, stuff like that. You found that right spot where we're not looking for the worst people. We're looking for the people are that are ready. We're looking for the people that are ready for help and ready to push. And that support system that you build very quickly with veterans that you're facilitating, that you're making possible, is huge. And so I want to commend you on the work that you've put in, because I know that you say you're not a veteran, but I see you serving veterans. And I don't think I just want to give you a personal humble appreciation for what you're doing, because you are serving veterans, you are serving your country, and it's not in the normal way. You don't get all the cool benefits, you don't get to go buy a TV at the on base tax free, but what you're doing is building a place in veterans' hearts, and I can't thank you enough for for what you're doing. And I do want to let you know I consider what you're doing a great service to veterans and to your country.
I really appreciate that. That means so much to me, and yeah, I don't know what to say. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, Jay, thank you. We really appreciate the time that you spent with us today. But before we sign off, is there anything else that we may not have covered that you think our alphas should know or that we didn't discuss?
Yeah. I mean, I just, I'm hoping, in a lot of ways, if you're interested in starting one, if you're interested in growing and strengthening your community, we have guidance, we have wraparound assistance to start them. We have coaching calls regularly. We'll put the sort of email that you can contact our team, VHA Bed Voices at va.gov, and our webpage to download the guidebook. But we have all sorts of services to help initiate these, and we have individuals all around the country. We meet quarterly to talk about successes and challenges, and we hope some alphas will join. And I just want to thank all of you for your efforts, and for letting me spend time with you today.
Well, again, we appreciate you so much. We'll have all your social handles and links that we've talked about in our show notes, but is there a website where alphas can go to learn more about your work? And I'm warning you, I hope you're ready for the influx, because you never know with these guys. You may get completely overwhelmed. Our alphas are pretty gung-ho.
Yeah, well, that would be wonderful. I would love to get a flood of emails for our team to go through. So yeah, at mentalhealth.va.gov/socials. And that's our webpage, and our email is VHA voices at va.gov. And so I look forward to the onslaught.
Thanks, Dr. Gorman. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure having you here with us today. Thank you for your journey that led you to this, and how you're serving the community and beyond. It's been a pleasure having you.
Oh, thank you so much.
All right, Alpha, stick around for some scuttlebutt after the break.
Talking about suicide is hard, but the American Legion has joined forces with Columbia University to develop training for those who want to learn more about interacting and responding to veterans who may be in crisis. American Legion Be the One training. In the 90-minute class, you'll learn to understand the types of suicidal ideation and 4 behaviors that indicate imminent risk, how to use the Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale to determine at-risk individuals, how to identify risk factors and warning signs, and how to communicate effectively with individuals who may be at risk of hurting themselves. Online and in-person sessions are available. Visit betheone.org/training to find a session. Learn the skills that'll give you the confidence to talk about suicide and be the one to save just one veteran.
Okay, alphas, we hope you had a great break. Now it's time for some SCUTTLEBUTT.
A new bill introduced in Congress titled the Purple Heart Veterans Education Act would permit retroactive Purple Heart recipients who served on or after September 11, 2001 to transfer their education benefits to one or more dependents. Now, this is interesting because I live in South Carolina, and so far as I know, if you are 100% service connected or Purple Heart recipient your children automatically get free education, but it varies state to state. Anyway, currently, those who receive a Purple Heart while in service can transfer these education benefits, but a loophole prohibited retroactive award recipients, such as those who receive the medal after they are medically retired, or from sharing the GI Bill opportunities with their dependents. So, when a letter from a constituent brought this to the attention of the Washington Senator Patty Murray, she joined forces with North Carolina Senator Thom Tillis to introduce the bipartisan bill aimed at closing up that loophole, which is fantastic. It said, quote, "It doesn't make any sense that service members who are awarded Purple Heart after their service can't transfer their GI Bills to their dependents, while those who receive it during their service can." Exactly. And I'm grateful to my constituent in Washington State who brought this gap in the law to my attention, said Murray, a senior member of the Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs. Thank you both for being so smart, so kind, and bringing this up. That makes a whole lot of sense. Fellas.
There is a very similar loophole issue with the I forget what the exact thing is called, but it is the act that allows wounded military to 100% disabled military to receive funds for an ADA vehicle. So prior to them changing the law, what happened is it was a one-time gift that allowed you to use this vehicle grant to purchase a vehicle that was made specifically for your needs as a disabled veteran. And they changed the law so that if you had used it, you could use it again after, I think it was after 10 years. The problem is that if you used it after they changed the law, you could use it again 10 years later. But if you used it before, you were ineligible for 25 years.
No car lasts that long anymore.
That's exactly the whole argument as to why it was changed. 10 years makes sense. You know, unfortunately, a lot of cars don't last that long either. Having said that, though, about every 10 years, it's expensive to be disabled. I mean, unfortunately, it just is. I don't know if you've ever seen the inside of somebody with a prosthetics car, but the whole thing looks like somebody flipped it with a bowling ball with a butter knife sticking out the side of it. I mean, the prosthetic just beats the whole inside of the car up. It took a second for Adam to work through the visual.
I was like, what? How is this? Like,
but that's a problem. That's another thing that definitely somebody needs to look into. But kudos on them for that.
Yeah.
Well, I would just say, like, there's a lot. I mean, there's like legislation. Sometimes it's like really hard. It takes a lot of education. A lot of advocacy in general to get stuff done. But where it just like is practical and it's like kind of common sense and makes sense. Like I'm in full support of that. And I think like those should be like the easy ones, to pass. And then the other thing is, we're talking about, benefits in entitlements versus, what happened to you and some kind of almost like administrative kind of clerical thing in how it's worded that inhibits somebody from, getting the full benefit of what they're entitled to. So, I mean, kudos for finding that. And we need more people looking at things like these, like the one you brought up too, Joe. And I'm sure there's, countless others. And like if it's going to impact and make someone, let alone many people's lives, better, then, well, that's why we have these systems in place.
Yeah. So, hey, Alphas, if any of you have a GI Bill and you have a Purple Heart and you want to transfer to your kids, we will have the link to that full article, that Military Times article, in the show notes. And perhaps we can persuade our super producer, Holly, to dig up a link for the vehicle grant too.
All right. The Gaza Pier, the U.S.-built structure that is part of a maritime corridor to provide aid to Gaza, sustained significant storm damage at the end of May that suspended aid deliveries while the structure was towed away for repairs. But did you know that the floating structure can trace its origins back to the 1930s era cigar boxes? According to an article originally published in The Conversation, in 1939, Navy's Civil Engineer Corps Commander John Noble Laycock was given the assignment to help prepare for a potential war in the Pacific. Laycock had to figure out how to construct naval bases on undeveloped islands, which included solving the problem of getting cargo and supplies from ships to a shoreline where there were no ports or piers. Laycock found plans developed by the Navy in the 1930s for small pontoons that could be easily transported and quickly assembled by hand into larger barges or floating platforms. But Laycock saw problems with their planned designs and method of connecting the pontoons to each other, and he had an idea. Laycock visited every concessionaire in the Navy's headquarters building, asking them to save empty cigar boxes for him. Laycock and a helper lined the boxes and spaced them evenly. Then they linked them together using wooden strips from children's kites, which they fastened to the corners of the boxes with small nuts and screws. The simple model demonstrated that it was possible to connect individual, uniformly sized, small pontoon boxes into much longer and much stronger floating beam. Multiple beams could be combined into the base for a platform of any needed size. A big enough platform could support cargo, military trucks, and armored vehicles weighing up to 55 tons. By 1941, Laycock had scaled up to steel and through the trial and error developed fasteners, which he called jewelry, to successfully connect the floating boxes to one another. In 1942, Seabees set up the first floating structure in Bora Bora and gave the new technology the moniker Laycock's Magic Box. It's fun to say. The success continued, and the pontoon structures played a critical role in Allied success, allowing critical supplies and vehicles to be rolled ashore during the invasion of Sicily, in Normandy, in the days and weeks following D-Day. Over the decades, this concept, with technological advancements in construction and fasteners, evolved into pontoon systems used in the Korean and Vietnam War. And the next generation of floating structures were used to provide humanitarian aid in places like Haiti after a massive earthquake in 2010, and now the pier at Gaza, all from a humble concept made of cigar boxes. The National Museum of American History in Washington, D.C. has the original cigar box model as one of the artifacts in the military collections. Joe, you better start saving those cigar boxes.
I'm going to have to start smoking cigars first. What was it called
Right.
again?
What was the name of it?
Yeah.
Say it again for us.
Laycock's Magic Box?
Oh, that's it. That's what it
That's
was.
perfect. You said
Yeah.
it.
Not saying that any more times.
Wait, I actually remember seeing a documentary on, I don't know if it was the military channel, history channel, something like that, but I remember seeing a whole thing about these Laycock boxes.
I'm not Googling that.
You better say magic.
Oh, sorry, Laycock magic. Yeah, anyway.
Box.
I'm not saying it anymore either. Anyway, yeah, it looked pretty interesting. And I wondered how these big metal things could float. But then, you know, big ships float. So that always, listen, science and math are not my strong suit. I don't
Magnets.
understand.
How do they work?
It's right.
Well, there's more to this story, and we'll have the link to the conversation article in our show notes.
I like that. The conversation. There's only one. And it's
What are you reading?
It's more like a monologue, isn't it?
or a diatribe. All right. Memorial Day has come and gone, bringing thousands of visitors to Arlington National Cemetery to pay respects to those who lie beneath the tombstones that cover the rolling hillsides. Thousands more will visit throughout the summer tourist season. In Section 60, the cemetery's 14-acre parcel where U.S. service members lost to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and counterterrorism missions elsewhere are laid to rest, Rod Gaynor, the cemetery's historical curator, takes frequent walkthroughs, patrolling for keepsakes left at the graves. More than 3,250 keepsakes have been gathered over the last 15 years from Section 60. Each is packed in a transparent red plastic bag, placed inside a white corrugated cardboard box and locked out of sight in a climate-controlled underground corridor not far from the Tomb of the Unknown. Among them is a wooden plaque bearing the names of 2 Marines killed in 2005, a diamond cross necklace. There are letters, photographs, patches, and pins. a high school football helmet, even an old Nintendo Game Boy. Oof. Yet Arlington Cemetery, in the midst of an expansion to accommodate tens of thousands of future burials, has no plan for the long-term storage of Section 60 mementos, and it lacks the space and budget to properly conserve and display them. Gaynor said that because of the boxed archives not being official U.S. government property, they're ineligible for taxpayer funding. Instead, Gaynor says he wants the Army, which oversees the cemetery, to have the objects appraised and then pay an outside organization to take possession of and curate them in a manner befitting their historical significance. To date, no candidates have been identified, leaving these artifacts to languish, out of sight and out of mind. We'd like to get it conserved, Gaynor said of the collection. We would also like to park it somewhere with an institution that would appreciate it and take good care of it. Arlington Cemetery's dilemma over how to permanently care for these objects bears a striking similarity to those faced by the National Park Service starting in the early 1980s when the Vietnam Veterans Memorial opened on the National Mall and offerings began to appear at the site. The agency wrote in a report published in 2021. In 1984, a decision was made to preserve them. The full collection, which now numbers in the hundreds of thousands, was moved to the National Capital Area's Museum Resource Center in Landover, Maryland, where it remains. It's not available for public viewing, though some items can be seen online, and sometimes they are shared with museums like the Smithsonian. The Wall That Heals, a mobile exhibit, also includes some replicas of mementos. This from the American Legion magazine had an article in May 2011 about the collection of items from the wall, and we'll make sure to drop a link in the show notes, but that was hard to read. That's hard.
I will say, so Rod Gaynor, if you're listening to the podcast, which I hope you're an alpha, please know that there are items that I've left at my friends' gravestones, and I would greatly appreciate it if they were not thrown away, because they mean something to me. I left them for a reason, as other people do. And I appreciate that you're making the effort on behalf of those of us who left these mementos as a sign of honor and mourning, and give us the grace to allow those to be stored somewhere and in a meaningful way. And if not, maybe we collectively, the rest of the alphas, can help identify some of these articles, and maybe they can find their way to extended family members, close friends, next of kin, or within our various organizations. I know, like, some our units, they have reunions and things like that, and maybe eventually there will be little museums for each unit. These pieces can find their way back to these homes somewhere, some way. I think there's multiple resolutions other than a trash can, because all of these things mean so much more than that.
So can I ask a question though? How should these things be preserved? Because isn't it like you're going to the cemetery and then you're placing it at the gravesite and you're leaving it behind? So I mean that those things just can't like accumulate indefinitely either. That's the other side of the equation.
Yeah, I
I
hear what you're saying.
I mean, I think the idea being that there needs to be a digital or physical record of these things. I mean, a website where you could go look at somebody's names and the things that have been left at their grave, if they're appropriate. But also, you know, if many of these keepsakes, not all of them, I'm sure, are high school football helmets and you know, things like a Nintendo Game Boy or something like that. I'm sure some of these things are very small little keepsakes, things that could go into a shadow box or something like that. And I think having a shadow box, you know, available, I think if somebody had a building and they were willing to house this stuff and you know, do fundraising for it, I could see that being something that would be a really cool thing to go see, keepsakes. That, you know, just hearing the names of these things, you know, these things that get left are very personal. You know, when you leave a Game Boy, you know, that wasn't left for the veteran that passed away. That was left for the child they were. When you leave a football helmet, that's somebody that, you know, that was a young man or a young woman that played a sport. And you know, like you said, these are all things that are important. and they represent a certain part of a relationship that we have. And so when we leave things for people, when we give things to people, that isn't the feeling itself. So these things, they just represent a love and a feeling. And so I think I think it's important to preserve those things, but you know, the important thing to remember is that they represent something else. They represent a feeling. They represent a love that somebody has for both that person and who they used to be.
I think
Yeah.
you guys both captured that, so beautifully. And I think it's, pretty remarkable that despite the logistical, hardships and problems of figuring out, how to maintain those things, that it's being done. It's been, the decision was made in 1984. And, there's people who really care about this that are willing to fight and figure it out. And I think you guys have some really great recommendations for how to do that.
It makes me curious, obviously, between the Vietnam Wall and other things, like, remember after 9/11, there were people, putting up pictures like, have you seen my loved one? And they would include maybe a keepsake or something like that. I mean, obviously those live at the 9/11 memorial now, or at least in part, and perhaps the rest is stored by the 9/11 commission or whatever. But, these Section 60 isn't the first one to face this type. So we'll find something that is meaningful and right.
We have links in the show notes as well if you want to know more, as well as the link for the Vietnam Wall offerings as well.
Well, Adam, switching gears here, tell us about your big news. What's the big news, my friend?
Yeah, we had some big news in at my local post in Dothan, Alabama, Post 12. So for the last 10 months, we've been trying to work through the official process, and yesterday, Houston County, which is where our post resides, was officially granted 5 acres of land for the use for the American Legion. And so it's a huge milestone for us. The post is really excited. We have 5 years to put a permanent structure on the building, or else we have to return it back to the county. But we already have plans to put like a mobile kind of trailer on there until we can start doing some fundraisers and figure out some ways to raise some more funds, because we're actually taking a lot of the ethos of what we've talked about on this podcast and helping to envision, a bolder future for that land, something that can bring the community together, not just the veterans, but that the community could benefit from. So we're talking about maybe taking some inspiration from our brothers and sisters over at Dripping Springs, and maybe throwing some walking trails on there, making it nature centered, maybe some fishing ponds. We also met with the mayor and started talking about how we might be able to bring other VSO and veteran service organizations under one roof for kind of a one-stop shop central hub for veteran services. And look, it's just a really exciting time. We get to envision what the future might hold, and then we're going to land, somewhere in between. And at the end of the day, we want to be able to bring people together to serve our community and the veterans, and to make a difference. And there's nothing more American Legion than trying to fulfill those things. So, congrats to Commander Irby and all my fellow brothers and sisters at Dothan Post 12.
That's tremendous. That's uplifting. We needed that. All right, Alphas, thanks for listening. You can subscribe to the podcast, our newsletter, or hey, think about it. You can send us some mail and guest recommendations at legion.org/Tango Alpha Lima. We'll see you next week.